Welcome to CivilNet. My guest via Skype from New York is Chris Atamian. He is a writer, producer, and a filmmaker. Chris, thank you for joining us here at CivilNet.
Well, thank you for having me.
We've been having a series of conversations with Armenians in the diaspora, Armenians here in Armenia. It is 2015, the centennial of the Armenian Genocide of 1915. You have always been writing, producing Armenian-related topics. You recently wrote a piece for the Huffington Post called 100 Years of Solitude, the Armenian Genocide and Ethnic Cleansing 2015. And it wasn't only to talk about the Armenian Genocide. Why don't you tell us, please, what the objective was with this piece?
Well, I think the objective was to, first of all, have something about the Armenian Genocide in the press which recalled to Americans who may not know that it's a 100th commemoration, that it was 100 years of commemorating this event, and that for 100 years Armenians had, in a sense, sort of felt alone in trying to get people to recognize it outside of Armenia and Armenian circles. Whether or not that's been successful, or if one should even try to have other people recognize it, is another issue, but that Armenians were still very much affected by it. And it was really spurred by an op-doc, which are documentaries that the New York Times does by Nicholas Kristof, who happens to be half Armenian as well, on the massacre of the Rohingya people, who are a Muslim tribe in Myanmar, in Burma. And they're a minority in Burma, and there are about 75,000 of them who have been placed in concentration camps. And they are facing ethnic cleansing or genocide. So there are people who have been rounded up, who have been executed, raped, who don't have medical treatment, and they live in what would, to Armenians, look exactly like Der Zor, or to Jews possibly remind them of Auschwitz or some of the worst concentration camps, except they don't have bars or barbed wire, but they're basically forced by the military to stay on these camps. And I also thought it was interesting that they were Muslim, because it's sort of a reversal of, the Armenian narrative, since we were Christians and the Turks at the time were Muslims. So I think it universalized it a bit. And I found it very shocking also because I happen to do Buddhist meditation, and the people that are oppressing them are Buddhists. And Buddhists, as you know, are supposed to be very peace-loving, and in this case are not. So
I must say, Chris, that when I read the article, it's certainly not on anybody's radar what's going on with the Rohingya people, as you said, in Myanmar. And I must admit that I had great difficulty watching Nicholas Kristof's op-doc, as you call it, about the situation there. It was really reminiscent, a few months ago when we were viewing images of the Yazidis on Mount Sinjar being attacked by the IS. As Armenians, I think any time that we see those kinds of images or read about those kinds of atrocities that are taking place today, it really continues to shock us. And yet, oftentimes, do we do enough as survivors, as descendants of survivors of the Armenian Genocide, 3-4 generations on, as we demand justice from the world for the atrocities that took place against our people? Perhaps we should be more vocal, not only with the Rohingyas in the Muslim minority in Myanmar, but I mean even during Rwanda and Darfur, Cambodia. Should it be part of our narrative today?
Well, I think so. I mean, there's a book by Samantha Power, Problems from Hell, about Samantha Power is the United States ambassador to the United Nations. And she actually thinks that Armenians are very vocal for a small group of people. So I think Armenians do a lot. I think what we've done less of is place ourselves in a context of a broader series of genocides that have happened in a century, and sort of try to ally ourselves with other people and look at genocide as a human problem rather than as a specifically Armenian one. And I think when you do that, you humanize the problem, and you also get more people interested, and make it seem less about yourself and more about human rights, which I think it is. I don't know what you do about this, because it seems to be something that goes back, Mark Nishanian, who is a very noted theorist, thinks that the Trojan War is the first example of ethnic cleansing. So if that is the case, it goes back centuries, and it seems to be something that people resort to in all sorts of situations. The situation in Burma is partly responsible to the fact that there's a huge pipeline that goes from Burma to China, and the Rohingya seem to be in the way of this pipeline. So I don't know if it's a government issue with not wanting them to oppose monetary interests, or if it is just a hatred of Muslims in that part of the world. So, you know, these issues are very complicated, and it's hard to figure out where to exactly impact them. But I think the more we do, the more we write, the more we complain. You know, I think Jews have been very good about doing this with the Holocaust. Of course, there's the Nuremberg trials, and, you know, the Allies obviously won the war, so it was a different situation with Armenians. But I think you never do enough is my answer to that question.
Yeah, you wrote something in your piece. You said genocidal instinct is deeply ingrained in human DNA, and it certainly seems that way, that, you know, when we think about 100 years ago, we think the world was perhaps a little bit more, excuse me, a little bit more backward, and yet we're living in the 21st century, and right before our eyes, these kinds of atrocities continue to take place. I want to talk to you now singularly as an Armenian. It is the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. It impacts us as Armenians, for many of us on a daily basis. Perhaps we don't subconsciously think about it, but it exists there. Do you think that this year, a round number, is it going to make any difference? Is it going to contribute to any kind of movement on the recognition? Is it going to contribute to any kind of global cohesiveness of Armenians from the diaspora and Armenians in the homeland? Can the 100th anniversary make a change in the narrative?
Well, I think it should. I think it's more of a marketing issue because, you know, what's the difference between 99 and 100? It's only 1 year, right? Sure. But I think it will, in the sense that, you know, the Venice Biennale, for example, which is a large or the largest art you know, festival in the world, is basically devoting everything to Armenian diaspora and artists this year, and a lot of it is about the genocide. So I think we're coalescing around that issue, and that can only help. And I think the Turkish government has been particularly active in trying to drive a wedge between the diaspora and the Republic of Armenia on this particular issue. And, you know, I don't think that's worked, and I don't think it will work in the future. I don't know what one can do except keep doing what we've been doing. I think there are legal issues which Armenians are or have not been as active in pursuing. I think they're difficult to pursue, again, because, you know, Turkey is not the Ottoman Empire, and they, in a sense, won that particular part of World War I. So at some point, you exhaust those means. But I think in terms of talking about it, writing about it, and remembering it, I think you can't make an obsession on one hand, because then it becomes too central to your identity. But I don't think, on the other hand, you should relent in reminding people what happened.
Yeah, I've been asking this.
I don't know if I answered.
Sure, sorry. I've been asking, you know, all of our guests when we are talking about the centennial, about the next century. One of our guests said that recognition of the Armenian genocide is not about being stuck in the past. It's about forging a new future. And as we enter the next century, following perhaps the greatest cataclysm in our history as a people, what should we do? What should we expect? What should we do as Armenians besides from doing the same things we've been doing? How do we become more innovative, and how do we take it to the next level? We seem to have existed in a 100-year period of sorrow, of emotions, and as you said, perhaps we didn't pursue the legal, political aspects of it as much as we could. So what can we do in the next century to perhaps elevate the discussion and then be able to move on?
Well, I think, for one, we can be more united in terms of the diaspora and the Republic of Armenia, and I would personally like to see more efforts going to help rebuild Armenia in whatever way we can, because, I mean, it is a young republic, and I think the stronger the Republic of Armenia is, the stronger our efforts to get recognition will be, because, after all, apart from individuals who might have leases or individual rights in Turkey, and whatever might happen within Turkey, which is where I think a lot of this is going to happen with the Armenians that live there. The Republic of Armenia is a legal entity in the country that can actually request things in court more than diaspora, which is sort of a spread out entity. So I think if we act as one and we have more contacts with each other and we try to support each other in whatever way we can, I think that'll help in ways that we can't really predict yet.
Yeah, certainly. I think there's two messages to take away from our conversation today is that we have to be more united and we shouldn't allow the continuing denialist policy by the Turkish government to put those kinds of divisions, because oftentimes they do like to do that, separate the diaspora from the homeland. And then as Armenians to be part of a global conversation, a global movement to end this kind of horror and atrocities that continue to be conducted all over the world. So, Chris Atamian, thank you so much for joining us from New York City. Thank you for all the work that you do, and hopefully we'll be talking with you again as we approach April 24th, the day Armenians all over the world will be commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide.
I look forward to talking to you again. Have a good day.
You too. And I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was Chris Atamian, a writer, producer, filmmaker from New York City. Stay with CivilNet.